Welcome to Bucs Insider Live. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith here to get you caught up on everything you need to know going into this next week. And of course, if you have any questions for us, all you got to do is leave them underneath the Facebook Live video, and we'll have a chance to get to those at the final segment of the show. First of all, let's go ahead and just start with some of the takeaways from that game this last Sunday against the Chiefs. What were the biggest things that, other than it not going how we wanted it to go, what were some of the biggest things that you took away from that game?
Well, I guess since it's a loss, you start with the not so happy stuff, right? Because there was some good stuff in that game, and we'll get to that, I'm sure. But you know, it was one of those games where it's frustrating to watch. I'm sure it was frustrating to be involved in because there just didn't seem to be an answer for anything the Chiefs were doing defensively. And some of that you just have to chalk up to the fact that Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce are phenomenal players with an incredible connection. I mean, I don't really know how you're supposed to stop the play where he scrambles all around and does a pirouette and then flips the ball like that. But overall, I think probably the part that the Buccaneers were least happy about is that they didn't stop the run. And that is something that has been a signature of the Todd Bowles defense ever since he got here in 2019. And in that span, they are still, even with that game, by far the best run defense in the league, but they didn't have it in that game. And you wonder how much it has to do with Akeem Hicks not being in there. You wonder if there are, you know, if guys are making mistakes or if it wasn't schemed up well for that particular running game or what. But it's a concern because the next game we're playing against the Falcons, which is a battle for first place, surprisingly, in the NFC South, the Falcons are running the ball really, really well. So that, I think, would have to be a focus for the team this week coming out of that last game.
Yeah, it's another back-to-back test to see if they learned the lessons from this last week. That does feel like running the ball. But even without Patterson, who's gone on IR, you'd think that would have made it where, oh, well, starting running backs out, maybe we don't have to worry about that so much. But we still know that's going to be the Falcons' game plan.
Yeah, well, they have a quarterback that can run. And that was a problem against Patrick Mahomes. But overall, if you look back at like the two Philadelphia games last year, Jalen Hurts, the Buccaneers actually handled that running quarterback very well, which is more like what, I mean, Mariota is not playing at the level of Jalen Hurts right now, but it's the same kind of concept with RPOs and designed runs and so on. So it is a concern. On the other hand, because we want to talk about some good things as well, right? It turns out when you have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin in the game, your passing attack is a lot better.
Who would have thought?
Right?
Who would have thought? You know?
So, yeah, you know, and Donovan Smith being back as well, and Mike Evans comes right back from that one-game suspension, that 30-yard catch right down the middle for the first big play of the game, ends up with 2 touchdowns, 103 yards, just vintage Mike Evans.
Not too shabby.
The second touchdown catch with that back corner fade, just you can't defend it. It's just, it's ridiculous. Look at that play. It's amazing.
It's a perfect throw and a perfect catch, and there is nothing you could do about it.
So in the process of that game, he also broke another record. So the guy that already holds the Bucs all-time records for touchdowns, receiving touchdowns, receptions, receiving yards, probably a few other things I'm not thinking of, is also now the all-time leader in most yards from scrimmage, passing a record that stood for a very long time by James Wilder, who had rushing yards and receiving yards. Mike's done it all but 10 yards through the air, but just yet another signpost, another obvious sign that Mike Evans is the most accomplished offensive player in Buccaneers history.
Unbelievable. And I think it's interesting that you pointed out, I mean, of course, Donovan Smith coming back was going to make Brady feel like he could probably hold on to it a little bit longer, wait for some of those routes to develop, but also the fact that Chris Godwin was alongside Mike Evans, that it's one thing to just have their skill set of the number of actual catches Chris gets, the number of catches Mike gets, but it's the effect they have on each other and what they force defenses to do. Is that something that you've noticed of how much they need each other to each have their own individual success? Yeah,
it definitely helps both of them. And it didn't hurt that the Bucs also had Russell Gage and they had Julio Jones for half, and they were making the passes to the backs work. I mean, Leonard Fournette and Rachaad White combined for more than 100 yards. But yeah, and I think the thing you saw out of Chris Godwin was that sort of missing element of being able to work the middle of the field, being an effective weapon out of the slot. Buccaneers didn't really find a solution for that in the games that Chris, the 2.5 games that Chris was out, and so I think that made a big difference. Even if, I mean, his 7 catches for 59 yards is a good day. Not overwhelming, but the effect he had on the entire offense, as you said, was big.
Yeah, and I think it was good to know that as much as they gave up more points than they had in the first 3 games combined, but then they scored more touchdowns than they had in the first 3 games combined. So it's just going to be about that complete game where finally now it does feel like the good news was the offense got going and getting the running backs involved in the passing game, as much as it was unfortunate that there was 3 yards rushing for the Bucs in that game?
Yes.
That at least, like you mentioned, to have over 100 yards in the receiving game from that was a huge thing. So it felt like, at least, even though the game didn't go how you wanted and there were some areas that didn't go as well defensively, but offensively it felt like you found some things you had not so far.
And one of those things was throwing the ball to Leonard Fournette and Rachaad White. And Rachaad, Coach Bowles had been saying for 2 weeks that we need to get the other backs more involved, and I think he specifically meant Rachaad White. And I think you have a sort of a two-headed monster now developing with Leonard Fournette and Rachaad White. And those two guys combined for, I think, 107 yards and a touchdown. And most of those passes were really quick throws that, Leonard would get like 10 or 12 yards out of. And same thing with Rachaad White, so it worked really well. And you like to see Rachaad getting involved. And in fact, with Cam Brate leaving the game with a concussion, Cade Otton played his highest percentage of snaps yet, and you have Luke Gedeke playing every snap at guard, and you look up from the end of the game, you realize, man, the rookie's played a ton.
Played a lot.
I mean, look at that. Logan Hall, he's kind of been getting about that many snaps every game. Obviously, Luke played every single snap, a much bigger percentage for Rachaad White and Cade Otton. Obviously, Jake Amart is in the game as much as you need. All of those snaps for Fatukasi were on special teams. And then Ko Kieft, he had his first career catch. It was kind of a nice spinning catch on the sideline, right? For 19
he looked
yards.
like a receiving tight end there.
So, I mean, especially on a team that has a lot of veterans, it's the oldest team in the league by average age. To see this many rookies making an impact is kind of cool.
Even just to have 7 rookies on your roster and active on game day is pretty incredible. It shows what a great job Jason Light and those guys did with drafting, with, signing, even like with, Fatukasi to have him in there even as an undrafted guy. It's pretty incredible, and it shows, I think, the potential as the season goes on, because we know with rookies, every snap is a big deal, every game is a big deal in their development and their learning. And so I think that when you see how much is dependent on these young guys, it will only get better as the season goes on and they get more experience.
Yeah, that's probably particularly true for Luke Gedeke.
Yes, absolutely. And so I know also the Bucs defense, we talked about, it was not the game they expect, or the game compared to the 3 before, because they came in just guns blazing in terms of being the stingiest defense and not allowing points going into it. What did you see that was different this week, or just overall where the defense still stands now, even with a game that did not really live up to their standards?
Well, and that's in the overall picture, you have to ask yourself, do I think that this game was the aberration, or were the first 3 games the aberration? And the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, because I don't think you're going to go through a season and allow just 9 points per game. But I don't think that you're going to see a lot of outings like this one. I think it's still a very talented defense with a lot of very good players at every level. And what's kind of I think has become a signature of this team is how many different people are contributing. And this particular game was due to injury because Logan Ryan left early and Carlton Davis left in the second half. So Keanu Neal played a good amount of the game in the Logan Ryan role. And then Sean Murphy-Bunting got his first shot, which we knew was coming at some point. And sure enough, he goes out there and gets an interception, the 8th of his career. Do you know that he has now intercepted Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, and Patrick Mahomes?
He just shows up for the big name QBs. He's like, excuse me, this is who I need an interception.
I mean, he also intercepted Gardner Minshew and Taylor Heineke.
But he wants to make sure he ticks off all those potential Hall of Fame kind of quarterbacks.
Yeah, we have to play all the big quarterbacks for him to get his picks. But that just put another person in the contribution is the word I'm looking for, I guess, column. I mean, look at this. It just occurred to me the other day when I was looking at our defensive stats how many different people had these big stats already.
Wow.
The Bucs have the most players in the league that have at least half a sack. They have the tied for the most players with the least interception, tied for the most players with the quarterback hit, and second behind San Francisco with the most players with the tackle for loss. So everybody's getting involved, isn't it?
And that just speaks, I think, so much to not only just the depth of talent on this team, but the scheme that Todd Bowles uses, where he uses players in so many different roles that's what keeps offenses on their toes. Not knowing, are you blitzing, are you dropping back, are you this is what makes offenses so confused, because if you look at these stats, there's a reason they have no idea who's coming, who's not, and it's incredible. And that confusion for them ends up meaning that these guys, it's so interesting to me that he can have a scheme that is confusing for the offense and yet not for the defense. That they all really are at a point where they know their roles.
That's a good point, and they've been working towards that for a
really long time. And that's the kind of communication and the consistency. I know Jamel Dean was on the radio show this week with me, and he talked about how different it is now of the way he learns and how he understands that Bowles can tell him something and he immediately gets it. And that wasn't the case his first year. And he said that Bowles can now tell that too, that it's so different, even that Bowles can
That's
just
so
say
cool.
it and
Yeah.
be done. And I thought that was such a great sign, and why
Right.
so many of these guys, and a guy like Jamel is having such a great year. So looking ahead to this game in Atlanta, what do you think are going to be the biggest things that we want to see based on this last game to show that it was an aberration and that they learned from it and have been
Yeah.
able to fix a few things?
Well, I think you want to get a quicker start for one thing. Fast starts have definitely not been something the Buccaneers have had much of this year. And you threw out the obvious fact that the Buccaneers ran 6 times for 3 yards in that game, right? That's terrible, and nobody's making excuses or trying to say that it was a good game in terms of running the ball, but you also have to at least give the context of it. There were only 6 carries because we were down 14-3 by the time we had 3 carries, and one of those was a loss for 4 yards, and then it was 21-3 moments later. So you were passing the entire time. So there's a lot of context to it. And Rachaad White, 2 of his 3 carries were from either the 2 or the 1 yard line, one of which was a 1-yard touchdown. Hey, a 1-yard touchdown on 3rd and 1 is a fantastic play, but doesn't really help the stats.
Right.
So that being said, I think the Buccaneers, while Todd Bowles constantly says it's not and Byron Leftwich, it's not necessarily about balance. They don't need to run the ball 50% of the time every game, but they need to be able to win in a variety of ways, and sometimes you're going to need to be able to run the ball. And I think they have the pieces to run the ball. Harold Goody was saying yesterday, he was talking at the podium because Todd Bowles was gone for a day.
Right.
And he was saying that some of those guys on the interior, they do need to play a little bit better. They understand the context and they like where they're at, but they do think they're going to get better.
Right.
And so they're going to get better. And I think Leonard Fournette and Rachaad White have the tools to give you a good rushing game, but I think you need to start quicker so you don't get off script and have to throw the ball 52 times.
I agree. And then this is perfect to our question that we had from Richard, who said, will we see more jumbo packages to get more production in the run game?
I'm not sure that necessarily would make that much of a difference. I mean, if you put the jumbo package out there, you're telling the defense you're probably going to run the ball, right? And I don't think controlling the line of scrimmage has been what's been going well for the Buccaneers in the running game in the last few games. So if you're just trying to put a big package out there, the defense is going to respond with a heavy front. Are you really making it any better? I'm not sure. I think they just need to run their normal expected plays the way they expect them to be run. They just need to be better at the execution of what they want to do.
Right. All right. Well, that is going to do it for us on this edition of Bucs Insider Live. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll be back here next week to talk about that Falcons game.